recording has started. So just to let everyone know, and I might just remind people, if people have joined late or whatever, that we are recording this as we go through. And just if people can just keep their mics off and keep their videos off, that'll just make the video streaming more efficient, I think. There will be time for questions and answers a bit later on, and we'll take questions written through the chat, and we'll give you a bit more information of that later on. So without further ado then, I'd like to begin. I'm going to go through the very technical process of sharing my PowerPoint presentation. So I do hope this works okay. Let's give it a go. Start that. Go back to this. I'm hoping you can all see that now. Francis, is that okay?
Yeah, I can see that fine. Thanks, Tim.
Perfect. Brilliant. Okay, so welcome to this webinar. This is about the Wetland Mosquito Survey Handbook that is now completed and we're launching today. So the main purpose of this is to give you more information about that. This is an output from the wetlandLIFE project, which was in turn funded through the Valuing Nature programme. So just for 5 minutes, I just want to give a few words of introduction to that, beginning with really what the Valuing Nature programme was all about. So Valuing Nature programme was a 5-year programme running from 2015 to 2020, and that was in itself building upon a Valuing Nature network that ran in the preceding years. It was a significant amount of funding on the programme, 6.5 million in total across the programme. And the general aim of the programme was to understand and represent the complexities of the natural environment in valuation analysis and decision making. And the programme funded 7 projects under 2 themes. One of those was a tipping points theme, and 3 projects were funded under that. And the other one was a health and well-being theme, and 4 projects were funded under that. And so the wetlandLIFE project was one of the 4 funded under the health and well-being strand. And in broad terms, the wetlandLIFE was a broad interdisciplinary project, and it had 3 broad aims: to develop our understanding of diverse wetland values and how mosquitoes may or may not affect these values, contribute knowledge for the management of wetlands to enhance social and ecological well-being, and explore and create narratives around people's relationships with wetlands and mosquitoes. So right from the outset, wetlandLIFE was about focusing on mosquitoes within a broader context of wetlands more generally. And we were working across 12 different sites across England, which you can see marked on the screen there. We had the ecological mosquito sites across all 12 sites, and the sites marked in red were those sites where we were doing socio-cultural, economic valuation work in more detail. So the wetlandLIFE project overall was looking at a broad socio-ecological, cultural valuation of wetlands with a focus on mosquitoes, and you'll hear more about that focus today. Before I continue, I'd like to just mention the whole wetlandLIFE team. So this was a broad team with a mixture of economists, historians, artists, social scientists, human geographers, etc. And it was a real privilege to work with this team over the years, and to, I think, hopefully develop what was some real interdisciplinary working and interdisciplinary outputs about the valuation of wetlands. And so I think just before I continue with this introduction, perhaps if some members of the wetlandLIFE team could just introduce themselves. So perhaps Francis, if you could introduce yourself, followed by Jolyon, who will both be speaking in a short while.
Yeah, hi, Tim, can you hear me okay?
I can, yep, that's great.
Great. Hi everyone, so my name is Francis Hawkes and I'm a Senior Research Fellow at the Natural Resources Institute in the University of Greenwich, and I've been working basically half-time, I suppose, for the last few years on the wetlandLIFE project looking at the ecology of British mosquitoes. So today being World Mosquito Day, very, very happy to be launching this book, which summarises some of the findings from the project, as well as existing material that we're bringing together into one resource that's open access, freely available to anybody who wants to use. So I'll talk about that a little bit later.
Brilliant, thanks Francis. And Jolyon?
Hi Tim, can you hear me?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay, I'm Jolyon Medlock. I lead the medical entomology team at Public Health England, based at Porton Down. Our role is to advise government on the risks posed by emerging vector-borne diseases, so mosquito and tick-borne diseases. But as an ecologist, I'm very keen in understanding what environmental change might have and ensuring that we make the appropriate assessments and provide the right information to people working in the environment sector. Mosquitoes are part of nature and they form an important part of the food web, and therefore any mitigation for a disease needs to take into account the environment sector. So I'm very excited by this project because it links sort of the public health and the environment and sort of empowers people working in the environment sector.
Brilliant, thank you very much for that. And Bob, could you perhaps just introduce yourself and say hello as a member of the team?
Hello, my name is Bob Cheke. I'm Professor of Tropical Zoology at the Natural Resources Institute of the University of Greenwich, and I was involved with the project helping with the field work. And we've also been collecting black flies in addition to mosquitoes. And I have with me here a colleague from the University of Valencia, Dr. David Lopez, who's been helping with the black fly side of things. Okay.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Bob, and welcome to your colleague. That's great. And is Gay Gibson with us at the moment? If she just wanted to say a quick hello. I'm not sure if she's logged on yet. No, perhaps not. Okay, brilliant. Well, thanks very much. And that's just a few people from the wetlandLIFE team. So if I can just navigate back to my PowerPoint. Is that back to the PowerPoint, Francis?
Yep, that's great.
Brilliant, lovely. Okay, great. So we've got a broad interdisciplinary team on the wetlandLIFE programme, and today we're really going to focus more on the mosquitoes and that sort of ecological element. But I think it's worthwhile saying a little bit about the broad background to wetlandLIFE. And the whole project really was about looking at the benefits of wetlands. It was a very positive, proactive project, which was about identifying the benefits of wetlands and how they can contribute to human health and well-being. And I think we can see that kind of emergent narrative illustrated, for instance, in WWT's work that they do and other agencies as well. And we can see that wetlands can inform a really important part in the not just the wetlands for biodiversity and the importance of biodiversity, but also for people going out, resting, getting exercise, relaxation, etc. And I think that perhaps the recent COVID pandemic has really brought a spotlight onto the importance of nature spaces for human benefit for a whole variety of reasons. But if we're talking about a positive narrative of wetlands in terms of health and well-being, of course, there is always the aspect of there are disvalues associated with wetlands as well. And quite often mosquitoes would perhaps be classified into that sort of disvalue area. So this example from the Chartered Institute of Environmental Health, talking about the management of mosquitoes more generally, not wetlands specifically, but it's saying that in the UK, mosquitoes can create a distressing biting nuisance, which affects the well-being of local residents and can pose a major economic problem in areas where tourism is a main source of income to the local community. So wetlandLIFE was very much about understanding or trying to understand mosquitoes, not just in terms of their ecological niche within wetlands, but also in terms of their socio-cultural understanding, the way people relate to mosquitoes and wetlands. And of course, that negative narrative can be amplified in media. So we see headlines of from the Mirror, from the Sun, etc., all about the potential negative disbenefits of mosquitoes. So wetlandLIFE was set up very much as an interdisciplinary project with this idea of mosquitoes at their heart, to be able to look more broadly at how mosquitoes can be valued, their importance in wetlands, and thinking about the effective management of mosquitoes as well. So I've just put this slide up to illustrate the range of different activities in the Wetland Life project, ranging from the ecological work on mosquitoes at the left-hand side of the image, through the economics, the social science, community voice methods, interviews, social research using the arts on the right-hand side. And across those different interdisciplinary disciplines, we're looking at evidence of mosquito distribution, we're eliciting values about mosquitoes and wetlands, and we're also, most importantly, creating narratives and empathy for wetlands, which are building into our knowledge and the meanings of wetlands. And I think, therefore, this book that we are launching today is a really important element in that jigsaw of understanding mosquitoes, putting mosquitoes, if you like, in their place in wetlands, and then advocating this relational approach whereby we use multiple approaches to knowledge in order to understand wetland values and the importance and roles of mosquitoes within that. So hopefully that gives you a bit of a flavour of the Wetland Life project linked into the Valuing Nature programme. The whole purpose of this particular webinar is to focus on the Wetland Mosquito Survey Handbook. So I think without further ado, I'll hand over to Jolyon Medlock, who will talk for a while about his perspective on mosquitoes and what the project's been doing, and then he will in turn hand over to Francis Hawkes. So if you'd like to take up the story there, Jolyon, thanks.
Okay, let me know when you can see my slides.
Yeah, we can see them, Jolyon. And I would just say to anybody in the audience, if you've got any questions as we're going through, do feel free to write them into the chat box. And perhaps when we get to the end of Jolyon's or my own talk, we can answer some of those questions. If you've got anything you'd like to ask or discussion points you'd like us to elaborate on at all, do let us know.
Okay, thanks, Tim. Thanks for the introduction and thanks for the opportunity to present. I'm sorry I can't meet everybody today, but hopefully this will suffice. So I'm leading medical entomology group at Public Health England and previously in the Health Protection Agency, and worked on mosquitoes for 20 years now, and within my current role had many questions from people working in wildlife trusts, the Environment Agency and RSPB about mosquitoes and laying fears within local populations about creating new wetlands and whether they might be an issue for mosquitoes or future disease risk. So I want to give a bit of an overview first about the British mosquitoes and then talk about some of the research that we did prior to this project that led up to the plan really to do Wetland Life and then also create the handbook for wetland managers. So I hope you can see that slide. So the British mosquitoes, we have now 36 species of British mosquito. They have sort of 4 different stages. An imago stage where the female is notorious for biting animals and humans. It's worth noting that not all British mosquitoes bite humans, and some can cause a nuisance. They lay eggs either singly or in rafts, either on water or in areas that will become submerged at a later date. And they can exploit open freshwater grassland or wet woodland or permanent water in ditches. They don't tend to do so well in large lakes or anywhere where there's surface movement of water. The eggs then hatch either almost immediately or can survive over winter or even up to 5 years, and they develop as aquatic larvae which feed on algae, and they go through 4 larval instars, at which point they're a good food resource for a whole range of aquatic insects. They then have a non-feeding pupal stage, which is quite brief, where metamorphosis takes place, and then you have the emerging adult, which pulls itself through the water surface, and then its sole aim really is to mate, blood feed, and lay eggs. And they have a whole range of different sort of life histories. Not all mosquito species are the same, and they're not all exploiting the same habitat. In recent years, there's been quite a bit of interest in new species, and Culex modestus has been found over the last 10 years in areas of the Thames estuary, and the last 4 years we've had a particular interest in invasive mosquitoes detecting Aedes albopictus, and the reason that we work on these are their potential public health issues. So just to go back 100 years, pre-1920, a lot of the effort on mosquitoes was all around malaria. Ague was well known in different parts of the country, particularly in the Thames estuary, parts of the Fens, which was later attributed to malaria. And then there were small outbreaks of malaria in returning servicemen in the Thames estuary, transmitted by local Anopheles mosquitoes. In the 1920s and 1930s, great strides were made in understanding British mosquitoes by Marshall and Staley down on Hayling Island. John Marshall was wealthy, and he moved to Hayling Island and set up the Institute. And actually in 1938 published quite a tome on British mosquitoes, some really good entomological research, mostly focused about their biology rather than specifically about their ecology or the wetland habitats. This work sort of was picked up in the 1960s to 1980s by Mike Service, Keith Snow, Clem Ramsdale, who published a whole range of papers and guidebooks on mosquito identification, and also really gives us the founding basis of all our knowledge on the biology of mosquitoes, the feeding habits of mosquitoes. So, I mean, it's always important to look to the past and what's been done before to build a solid foundation for the future. Since 2002, there's been quite a bit of mosquito surveillance work and research by a number of organisations, but I'll just talk about the ones that Health Protection Agency and Public Health England, who I've worked for, but also with the University of Greenwich and the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. And since 2010, we've been involved in conducting surveillance of mosquitoes at wetlands, and this has been a collaboration with a whole range of environmental organisations, and we thank them for running traps for us and allowing us access not only for surveillance of mosquitoes but also for conducting research. Now, it's important when we assess the risk of an emerging infection that it's proportionate and that we're well informed and there's an evidence basis to any control, and we cannot do that if no one's collected mosquitoes since the 1960s. So we've been running these traps now for about 10 years, and that's where some of the detection of the new mosquitoes have come in. Allied to that, and coincident with that, there have been, of course, as some of you will know, increased outbreaks of mosquito-borne disease in North America and Europe, and notably Zika virus, but also dengue and chikungunya in parts of France, malaria in Greece, and then large outbreaks of West Nile virus in North America and also in Europe. And government always want to know what the risks are and how we can manage those. So a lot of the basis here is to try and build the evidence so that we mount any response in a proportionate way. So I just want to talk about some of the briefly of the field research on mosquitoes, specifically in wetlands, that we've done over the last 10 years. If we think back to our history, we know that some coastal mosquitoes have previously transmitted malaria, and that's usually the primary concern that people raise, either in the public or people within the environment sector. And of course, we're in a process of wetland creation and mitigating environmental change, climate change, storm surges. So we did do some research, and you can find these papers. I won't go into too much depth about the results particularly. We did some work looking at managed realignment and mosquitoes to see whether they would provide suitable habitat for malaria vectors or even a whole range of other nuisance species. And this work was done up on the Humber and also on the Essex coast. And we continue to keep abreast of a whole range of coastal wetland creation schemes as we go forward. Also under environmental mitigation for protected species, as we continue to build houses, there are areas where urban wetlands are created. And even just this week, I've had questions about whether particular schemes would likely create a mosquito or disease nuisance in the future. So we conducted some work looking at the sort of the range of different habitats, wetland habitats that would be created as part of ecological mitigation for protected species, and whether they would be suitable for these colonization of mosquitoes. And then we also did some work sponsored by the Great Fen Project up to 10 years ago now in Cambridge Fens, looking at the diversity of mosquitoes across a range of different wetland habitats in Wood Walton Fen, but then also in arable reversion projects. And what's became quite clear is that up to 15, 16 mosquito species may well live happily together in a wetland, but they actually occupy specific niches and are impacted by both vegetation and water management, and also in response to drought and flooding events. So we published some of these findings in a couple of papers looking specifically at species diversity, but then also identifying sort of strategies for future mitigation if they became an issue. So just to summarise some of those research findings, wetlands can provide habitats for mosquitoes, and some mosquitoes can cause a nuisance, whether that's just when you're in the wetland or whether you live nearby. There are some notable nuisance species on some parts of the coast in England. However, it's important to remember that mosquitoes do play an important role in the food web, and I'll come back to that on the next slide. So it is important to consider mosquito ecology, the range of different species. If there was a disease outbreak, it may only be one of a number of species that is important, and they might have a particular niche, and it might be very simple habitat management that will mitigate that population. Predators are important. A healthy wetland means fewer mosquitoes. Mosquitoes do tend to become more abundant in habitats that flood and dry rather than permanent habitats. So any public health risk assessment and control strategy needs to be based on field evidence, and not all wetlands are the same. We have to treat different wetlands as on a case-by-case basis. There are various different types of cereal stages that are developed within a wetland, and therefore all of those need to be considered individually. But there's an opportunity here also during the pre-construction and management plans of wetlands to think about what public health risks might be. It's an own goal if we create new wetlands and then immediately have a new nuisance mosquito problem. So the aim really of the guidance that the handbook we're going to be talking about is about empowering wetland managers to understand more about mosquitoes on their wetlands, where those mosquitoes might be coming from, what impact habitat management might have, and if there's no risk, which often there isn't any risk, then empowering them with the information to allay any fears through public consultations and talking to the public. So health and environment sectors are interlinked. We're talking about mosquitoes, which are part of the environment, and therefore these pathogens are often part of the environment as well. So we need to think ecologically when we come to assess the risk. And any response needs to be proportionate and needs to be environmentally appropriate. So this next slide here just is a summary of literature done in the 1960s and some more recent work over the last 10 years, looking at the role that mosquitoes have. And if we can have any sympathy with mosquitoes, it's that actually they're hammered by predators all throughout their life cycle. So in their larval stages, as they try and develop within water, there's a whole range of bugs and beetles, diving beetles and water measurers that are looking to feed on those mosquitoes. There's also fish. There's immature stages of dragonflies and damselflies, and there are also saltwater gammarids, and of course amphibians, frogs and newts. As those mosquitoes then develop through the pupal stage into the adult and haul themselves out of the water surface, they immediately get pounced upon by a whole range of diptera, and then as they manage to make it through and rest in the vegetation, fly into the webs of a range of different species of spider, or even if they rest in hibernation sites. Then if they manage to make it further than that into the air, there are predatory dragonflies and bats and insectivorous birds. So it's important that mosquitoes are considered as part of the food web and that any control is focused on those particular species that might be causing a public or veterinary issue. So from this work, it became quite clear that really we need to translate this research into guidelines for wetland managers so that when somebody has a concern, they can immediately pick up a handbook and learn more about mosquitoes at their leisure, because currently the only things available really are identification keys, which provide minimal information on the biology of mosquitoes, and not everybody has time to trawl through the literature looking for the basic for the original science. So the idea is to develop a tool for predicting mosquito diversity, which we did initially based upon the research, and then we wanted to test this as part of the wetlandLIFE project by conducting adult and larval sampling at 12 wetlands across 2 years. And these were coastal, farmland reversion, urban and wet woodland sites. We made predictions of mosquito diversity at each of these wetlands based upon talking to the wetland managers and walkover visits. And then we compared the actual results we got from the field surveys with the predictions that we made. And we looked at this data with regard to functional groups, which I'll mention in the next slide. And really then the idea was to refine that tool and write up some guidelines for site assessment and survey, which Francis will talk about. So this just shows some of the habitats that provide habitats for mosquitoes and some that don't provide habitats for mosquitoes. Not all those aquatic habitats are suitable, and a lot of it depends upon how quickly they wet and dry, how long they're wet for, what predators occur, what the vegetation management is, and when they are wet, whether they're wet in the winter, when they're wet in the summer. Not all mosquitoes will be found in all of those wetland habitats. So you can see here, then this occurs in the guidelines, and it'll be explained much further in those in the handbook. The different species of mosquito that we have, the more common species, and how they are separated into these functional groups. And then at the bottom there, you can see some data from Wood Walton Fen that looks at numbers of mosquitoes in the traps per night. And you can see the areas of the wetland system that have larger numbers of mosquitoes and which of those functional groups they belong to. So just to finish my bit off, really, these are the 12 wetland sites that we worked at that Tim mentioned previously, and we're very grateful for them allowing us to run traps there. And in fact, many of them have continued to run traps prior to the project and continue to do so now. And this gives us really important information on mosquito numbers and has enabled us to develop this handbook. From there, you can see a few images of some of the mosquito prediction tool as well, which Francis will talk about. So I will sign off and hand over to Francis.
Thanks, Jolyon. That was fantastic. I just want to pause just for a second to see if there's any questions. If anybody wants to, you can raise your hand. I think in Teams, there's a small hand symbol, or of course you can type a question in the comments in the chat there. So if there's no questions, then we'll move on. So I'm hoping you can see my slides.
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay, so that's a great introduction from Jolyon to this handbook. So the Wetland Mosquito Survey Handbook, assessing suitability of British wetlands for mosquitoes. And that's been developed over the last few years, a combination of searching information in the literature that's already been published in a sort of variety of different formats, as well as the empirical field research that we conducted across England in these very different wetland habitat types. So Tim's already talked a bit about wetlandLIFE, so I encourage you to have a look at our website, wetlandlife.org. Lots of information there about the rest of the project. There's some videos, there's some documentaries from different wetland sites where we've been working, as well as a link to download the handbook, which I'll put into the chat when I've finished. So we're really kind of developing this handbook to bring together information that perhaps wasn't immediately accessible. As Jolyon said, not everyone's got time to go through the published literature or look in details at these quite complex keys for British mosquitoes. And there's a real demand, certainly during the project, we had maybe 4 or 5 separate inquiries from people working either in conservation or planning or landscape partnership schemes, where they were having inquiries from the public about the link between wetlands and mosquitoes. And it's really no surprise that those questions are being asked when the way that mosquitoes are spoken about in certainly the tabloid press is really very simplified. One mosquito is very, very different to another mosquito species, and we don't really have that nuance in perhaps the wider understanding about mosquitoes and their possible role in disease transmission. At the moment, there's no mosquito-borne disease in the UK, which is really important to note for human health. And we want to be able to empower wetland managers to make sure that they can continue to manage their wetlands and expand and restore areas of wetland for conservation, for climate change adaptation, without fear of this kind of negative public concern around mosquitoes. So we did some field research, as mentioned before, in these wetland sites over England. The photo there is actually from a wildlife camera trap in Chippenham Fen, where we got caught in the camera when we were sampling there in 2017. And there's quite an extensive programme of field research. So this involved sampling adult mosquitoes over the course of around 6 months each year, as well as larval mosquitoes, so going and actually dipping directly from the water in different wetland habitats so that we could see exactly which species were associated with different habitat types. talking extensively with the wetland managers who supported the project to understand the vegetation structure, any vegetation management, water levels, how those may be managed deliberately or how they change naturally throughout the course of a year, and using that information to help us understand the kind of species that you might expect to find in particular wetland environments. And that's really one of the key findings that we're presenting in the book, which I'll come to in a little bit. So also bringing in the experience from Public Health England's entomology team and these kinds of inquiries that they have on a fairly routine basis. As Jolyon said, we're aiming for this book to really provide the evidence base for wetland management so that people with responsibilities for wetlands can think about how they might respond to public inquiries or concerns, that they have the information at their fingertips in a sort of preemptive way, rather than waiting for any particular concern to be raised and then being on the back foot without that information. So the key chapters that are included in the handbook are looking at mosquitoes and their place in British wetlands, public health issues associated with mosquitoes, a fascinating chapter from our colleague Peter Coates on historical perspectives on British nuisance mosquitoes during the interwar years, some background information on the biology and ecology of mosquitoes. And then we have two sections which are really two sides of the same coin: species profiles and our wetland mosquito prediction tool. And then some information on surveying, so anybody who's reading this can then go out and conduct their own adult survey or larval survey, and a little bit about the methods for controlling mosquitoes should that need ever arise. So thinking about mosquitoes in British wetlands, as Jolyon so wonderfully showed, there are so many species that have been shown to predate mosquitoes. We've actually just had a PhD student, NRI, graduate studying bats and looking at the DNA of different species found in bat feces, and has found quite a lot of mosquito DNA in bat feces. So it's really fascinating to see that all of these species that people love, they go to wetlands to enjoy watching birds, or enjoying watching dragonflies flying on the wind. All of these will predate mosquitoes, and by and large they really do help to keep their population numbers in check. A diverse wetland with all of these species will regulate populations of different types of mosquitoes. They don't tend to have any sort of preference for particular species of mosquitoes to feed on. So we wanted to present that information quite comprehensively, so that any wetland manager can see where other species that they have on site fit in with mosquitoes. And there's a little bit of evidence as well that mosquitoes can be involved in pollination. We're not aware of any kind of obligate plants that rely on mosquito for their pollination, but it's another important factor that I think is quite nice to know, because one of the questions I get asked a lot is, what is the point of a mosquito? So having this broader ecological context is quite powerful and quite helpful. So the public health issues surrounding mosquitoes, Jolyon has covered already, and we go into a lot more detail here, looking at the statutory responsibilities as laid out in the Public Health Act and the Clean Neighbourhood and Environment Act. But what we've tried to do is bring this together a little bit more holistically, and to do that we've included some information from interviews that Tim and our colleague Adriana collected from interviewing people who live and work on wetlands, to really understand what public perceptions of mosquitoes are, aside from these very dramatic headlines we might find in the papers. And it's been great to find that actually most people are very, very tolerant. They really do see mosquitoes as part of insect biodiversity. Lots of people very aware of broader issues around insect declines. And in fact, some people, quite adamant that mosquitoes have as much right to be in our wetlands as any other insect. And they certainly understand that they are part of that food web and support all the other creatures that they are pleased to see in wetlands. So we've tried to bring this together in a more holistic way, and including in the handbook the tools to help wetland managers survey for mosquitoes, understand a bit more about the diverse species that might be present and how they may have different preferences for host animals to feed on, different periods of activity throughout the year or across the day. as well as, of course, preparing, should there ever be an issue with a public health concern, be that nuisance or disease, how they might be able to respond to that. As I said, we've got this fantastic chapter on some historical perspectives. Here is this is a photo from just up the road from where I live. It's in North Kent. This is a small churchyard that used to be visited by Charles Dickens, and these are some small gravestones from infants who died between the 17 and 1800s, and they're thought to have all died from malaria transmitted on the coastal marshes of North Kent. And clearly we don't have malaria transmission in the UK anymore, and that's thanks to a number of factors, very few of which ever had anything to do with actual control of mosquitoes. It was much more related to kind of improving general health, improving quality of housing and things like this. But it sets the tone for how later in the interwar years there was a real kind of campaign against these nuisance mosquitoes. So we have this photo here from the first London Sanitary Company, who were probably Royal Engineers, set out on the North Kent marshes to clear drains and ditches of vegetation that might help communities of malaria carrying mosquitoes, because troops were coming back from the First World War and reinfecting local mosquito populations. So this then evolved into more of an issue with nuisance biting, and this is explored in a little bit more detail in Peter's chapter on historical perspectives. It's really interesting to see these kind of previous incarnations of mosquito control and their very, very kind of militant language about how mosquitoes should be controlled and killed off in certain habitats. I think we've moved a little way on from there, but I think it sets the tone for how we've thought about mosquitoes for a long time, and that's starting to change now as we see things in a little bit a kind of broader ecological context. Of course, we've got some background information on mosquito biology and ecology, ways to identify male and female mosquitoes, which is quite important because it's only female mosquitoes that take blood meals. Also ways of identifying different subfamilies from the larvae, depending on simply their position in the water. So these are simple skills that anyone can master, and are really helpful if you're thinking about doing any surveillance. So the species profiles, these are kind of hand in glove with the wetland mosquito prediction tool. These species profiles, they cover about 20 species, so we're not covering all 36 because some of those are really very rare and certainly aren't implicated in any nuisance or public health issues. So for these 20 or so species, we've created these species profile fact sheets. So they give a little bit of background about each of the species, the kind of habitats you might expect to find them in, their general distribution across the UK, information on their life history and phenology, so the different times of year when you might expect to find them in their different stages, from larvae, pupae and adults, whether or not there's a peak in that population of adults. Also information about their host preferences, so those are the animals that the mosquito species feed on or tend to feed on. Whether or not there's any vector issues, so vectors are mosquitoes that have the potential to carry infectious diseases, the pathogens that cause infectious disease, and mitigation options. So should there be a problem associated with this species, what options might be available for mitigating against that? And as you can see on the bottom left-hand corner there, we've tried to summarise this in quite an accessible way, looking at biting risk, vector concern, and the principal hosts. So it's a very quick reference guide to these kind of 20 or so British mosquito species. course, the other way of looking at that, and this has really been the basis based on the fieldwork that we've completed, is looking at the habitats that are associated with particular mosquitoes. So you can look up the information if you already know which species of mosquito you're interested in. You can see the habitats it's linked to, or from the other direction, if you have a particular wetland environment that you're working in or you want to know a bit more about, you can see if there are likely to be particular species that are linked to those habitats. So to make that a little bit more accessible, we've turned it into a kind of simple set of flowcharts. So we've got 3 different brackish or coastal habitats and 8 that are linked to freshwater. So you can look through, see which habitat you're particularly interested in. For instance, if you were looking at brackish or coastal habitats and you were looking at salt marsh, you would be able to follow the salt marsh route and see whether or not there are particular mosquitoes or not associated with that habitat. And then on the right, we've got the supporting text. So alongside each of these flowcharts that allow you to work through the different habitats, how they're managed and whether or not they're linked to particular species, a little bit more information about those wetland environments, the way that they're managed, if there's a particular way of managing the water regimes, vegetation management, weather events that might affect their suitability for mosquitoes to colonise and the different species you might expect to find there. We've tried to include a lot of photos as well, just to really give clear examples of the kind of habitats we're talking about. We've avoided very kind of technical habitat descriptors. These are really based on the features of the environment that are most relevant to mosquito ecology. So we think and we hope it's very accessible, and that anybody could follow these flowcharts to understand the types of mosquito species you could reasonably expect within a particular habitat. They're not cast iron guarantees, of course. I think there's always going to be a few situations where something comes from left field and perhaps you have a species there that wasn't expected. And of course, just because a habitat is suitable for mosquitoes, it doesn't necessarily mean that those mosquitoes would be present. And finally, we have a chapter on surveying and control. So this is looking at ways that you can sample mosquitoes at the different stages, so as larvae and adults, with step-by-step instructions. A hint on how to do some of the identification. We refer to, of course, the published keys, but we have included a simplified key to adults and larvae. So that's a useful tool to use if you want to actually conduct your own sampling programme and have a go at doing some identifications. And we also touch on the methods of control that are used, and that encompasses more broadly ecological management and water and vegetation management. So thinking more about how you might control the flooding regime or clearing of ditches and management of vegetation, which is really, I think, our preferred way of thinking about mosquito control and encouraging healthy wetland environments that have lots of predators of mosquitoes rather than any sort of form of chemical control, although we do touch on the larval control products that are available for use in the UK. With that, I think I'll sign off, but I would like to just quickly thank, as Jolyon already has, all of the wetland sites where we conducted our field work. So they were all across England, up and down the country, and all of these organisations listed here have been incredibly supportive and helpful in allowing us to do that. Also like to thank Anthony Abbott, Katie James and Harrison Lambert, who helped us a lot in field work and field data collection. And finally, the production of the handbook itself owes a lot to Gillian Summers and GDA Creative, who worked tirelessly on this production process. And there are some absolutely wonderful photos of mosquitoes in the handbook, and I think if you download it just for those, it's absolutely worth it. They were taken by Anders Lindström, and he has a wonderful Flickr page full of his excellent mosquito photos, and he kindly agreed to let us use them in the handbook. So I think that's my notes done. And what I can do now is just share with everyone a link to the handbook, so it's available to download now from the wetlandLIFE website. If I just open that up, and it's a PDF, so it's an ebook. It's, I think, about 12 megabytes. So you should be able to download it as of today. So in the chat there is a link to our web address. And there's also some other fantastic outputs from the project there. As I said, we've got a beautiful photo essay by Tim, which covers some amazing wetland landscape photography, and it's really quite unlike anything I've ever seen before. They're absolutely stunning photographs, which is well worth a look, as well as a link to the handbook itself.
That's fantastic, Francis and Jolyon. Thank you so much for that. That was really fascinating to hear all about the background research, to hear about what's been going on. Yeah, I mean, you know, a huge thanks to everyone in the wetlandLIFE team, but I mean, for all your work on this, it's been absolutely amazing. Now we've got a few minutes before the end of the meeting, so if anyone in the audience wants to ask a question, please do that. You can either type it into the chat, or I think there is a raised hand feature, and indeed I can see the raised hand feature is working. So okay, if you've got, yeah, over to you.
Hello, I had messed up and left my camera off all that time because it takes up so much anyway. So apologies for that. And I did just want to quickly introduce myself. I'm Professor Gabriella Gibson, and I'm Professor of Medical Entomology, which means that I've spent most of my life, my academic life, trying to understand mosquitoes, their behavior, their ability to cause disease throughout the tropics, and trying to understand how we can do something about that to reduce mosquito-borne diseases. What I just want to say about my collaboration with this is that it has just been an outstanding opportunity to merge together academics, which can be very focused. We're asked to really study particular aspects of science and produce papers, but they tend to be fairly narrow, and the academic community tries to sort of interdisciplinary. But to have the opportunity to work with Public Health England on this project was just phenomenal, because they're the ones at the actual sort of action line of having to manage different situations like mosquitoes. And we were able to just collaborate so nicely between some of our expertise in academic side of this kind of research and the practical outcomes, and making sure that we can link these two things together. And I'm very grateful to the research councils for seeing that this was a good opportunity to bring together very important disciplines. So I'll just stop there, because I'm sure there are plenty of questions people would like to ask.
Yeah, thanks for that, Gay. And it's so true. I remember when we heard that we'd received funding for this project, was it 4 years ago now, and you know, the absolute delight now to see it sort of track through and see these outputs being produced. It's a really good moment, I think, for the whole of the project team to see the launch of this particular guidebook. I guess I'd like to just jump in and ask one question, if I'm allowed of people. I guess research is never complete; it's always ongoing. So I suppose we've got the Wetland Mosquito Survey Handbook now, but have you got any thoughts about what happens next? Where do we go from here? Where's the next? What's the next stage to move on to? Any thoughts on that? And that would be to either Francis or Jolyon or Gay or Bob.
Well, you never quite know what's on the public health horizon. Obviously, we've had an interesting year this year. I mean, I think we've been fortunate so far in the fact that we've had time to prepare for a mosquito-borne disease issue in the UK. In other parts of the world, and also in Europe, there has been very little time. We've had invasive mosquitoes established pretty quickly, and then they become on the political agenda, particularly when there's a disease case. And we've had, obviously, Zika virus came to the international recognition pretty quickly, and of the consequences of that, and then before we knew it, it would spread around the world. We know that diseases spread around the world pretty quickly, and I think what's been really good with this is that is conducting the work and actually having the backing of NERC ahead of time before mosquitoes become an issue, having that foresight to be able to prepare information, get guidebooks out, conduct the research so that we're ready to go. And I think Public Health England, it's all about preparedness for future disease threats. So the more prepared we are, the better. The more joined up we are, the better. But as Gay makes a very valid point, it's very well having people in academia who know an awful lot about mosquitoes and people in Public Health England who are prepared for them. But actually, it's not the academics or the public health officials that necessarily work in the environment where mosquitoes may or may not be an issue. And they're not necessarily the ones that deal with the public on a regular basis about their concerns about mosquitoes. We're all very keen, and wetlandLIFE has been very good about promoting wetlands and the value that wetland has, not only for health and well-being, but also for biodiversity. So being able to sort of provide the evidence and information ahead of time and bridge that gap between policy, science, and translating into something that's useful at a local level. I know from sort of my ecology background, looking at survey handbooks for protected species or conducting woodland surveys for ancient woodland indicators, there was something missing really for mosquitoes, and that's where we were trying to go with this handbook. So it's not a big academic tome, but hopefully it's very readable and useful for people in the field. I mean, there are other vector-borne diseases that might be useful to study in the future, particularly related to ticks. So I'm sure understanding how we manage a range of different habitats or survey those habitats for understanding potential disease risk and how we can manage them in an environmentally friendly way, there's plenty of scope.
I can just
It's certainly transformed my view of mosquitoes, that's for sure. Sorry, Gay, yeah.
I just had one more comment. It's that I think also it's opened my eyes to how much we could be sharing now. It's almost like a model exercise that we've done that is useful within itself. But I think, Jolyon, you have to interact so much with, say, the European disease control associations, with tropical ones, and to be able to have this kind of a physical thing you can hand to people and say, let's sort of use this in a way so we can anticipate Europe type things that might happen between the UK and Europe, but then also with our tropical colleagues as well.
Right, we have a couple of questions coming in on the chat. So the first is about losing salt marshes on the Groveney marshes in North Kent, so not far at all from where we are right now. Could having solar panels replacing salt marsh upset the invertebrate communities, including mosquitoes? I think very much depends. I don't think there's been any empirical research around solar panels on salt marsh specifically, but I would say it very much depends how they're implemented as to whether or not that would affect the communities there. Got another question. There are 36 species altogether. Any of them are vectors of disease for West Nile virus here in the UK? Jolyon, did you want to?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because that's the tenet of the whole thing, isn't it? It's easy to say we have 36 species of mosquito, but they're not all going to be biting humans or biting specific animals like horses that suffer from West Nile. And therefore it's identifying which of those 36 species are likely to be disease vectors. Now, if we look to the rest of Europe, where there is ongoing West Nile virus transmission each year, the virus tends to be transmitted between birds by mosquitoes that just bite birds, and then there is a bridge vector that transmits the virus from birds to horses or to humans. And those tend to be Culex mosquitoes. So the majority of our mosquitoes, well, the largest genera is the Aedes mosquitoes, and then we have about 6 Anopheles, and then a probably slightly smaller number of Culex mosquitoes. So we do have, at this time of year, and actually someone was complaining to me yesterday about mosquitoes buzzing around them in the evening in their homes. We have a particularly common species, Culex pipiens, which has different physiological forms, but the most common one actually doesn't bite humans, but does enter our houses the end of August, September, October to hibernate. and therefore, although they cause a bit of a buzz in your ear, they're not necessarily a risk to human health. We do have Culex modestus, which is another species of mosquito that we discovered only about 10 years ago, and we have a program. We've done quite a bit of research with the University of Greenwich on this, and others from London School and Oxford, and we monitor this mosquito. We don't particularly have many reports about nuisance biting, but we do know that they occur across the Thames estuary and in the Essex coast. We have collected them and looked for virus. There's no evidence of any virus in those mosquitoes. And we also have an ongoing program within Public Health England for people who present with viral encephalitis in those areas, and there's no evidence for any West Nile virus either. However, as I stated earlier, these viruses do change in their distribution, so we need to be prepared for the future. So the short answer is actually that we don't have many mosquitoes that are potential West Nile virus vectors, but we do have some, and that's why we like to prepare.
I've just put a link, I'll just put it again, to the handbook, so that anyone who wants to download it, you can just click on the link, and it's the first entry on that page, the Wetland Mosquito Survey Handbook. So you just click on the image of the book, and you can download that as a PDF. It's kind of an interactive one, so you can jump straight to the content that you're particularly interested in, and we've tried to design it so that it's the sort of material you can dip in and out of. You're not expecting to sort of need to read it to cover to make sense of it. You can access the bits that are most interesting or most relevant to you as and when you need them.
Great, that's brilliant. I think we're just about coming up to the hour. I think we said at the start that we would take about an hour, and we're 3 minutes off. So, Gay, did you want to? You're muted, Gay. Can you unmute?
Sorry about that. I just wanted to reiterate as well that the wetlandLIFE website is really amazing to explore all of it, and to not, that the handbook is accessible there too, but all the other sections are really interesting.
Yeah, we've got lots of content on the wetlandLIFE site, so if you want to make contact through the wetlandLIFE site, that would be great, and start to look at some of the outputs for the project there. But I think for now, my big congratulations to the team to produce this excellent handbook. I hope you've all enjoyed it in the audience hearing about it, and I hope you download it and get some really good use from it. So I think, unless any members of the team would like to say anything. Yep, Jolyon.
If anybody reads the handbook and would like to be involved in any sort of mosquito surveillance or research projects, or any advice in understanding mosquitoes in existing or new wetlands, then please get in touch with the team.
Absolutely.
Okay, brilliant. Okay, well, in that case, thank you very much to the team, and well done. And thank you very much for all in the audience for sparing us some of your time to listen about the handbook. It's very appreciated. And watch this space and watch the website. Thanks very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.